Hello and welcome back to our channel. Today we're going to discuss and demonstrate some posing basics for dance photography. Many dance photographers often feel a little bit intimidated by posing, so today we're going to go over some basics of posing, some tips and tricks to get you really comfortable with posing a dancer in front of your camera. Our model for the demonstration today is Carolina. She's a wonderful dancer and we're really excited to have her with us today.
I have been dancing for about 12 years now, and I dance at ABT's JKO school in New York. My favorite thing about dancing is definitely being able to perform on stage and watching others and being able to be inspired by everyone around you. My favorite ballet step is definitely pirouettes. I love to practice them a lot.
When we approach a photo shoot with a dancer, we like to give them separate buckets for different types of poses. So we'll have an extensions bucket, we'll have a floor pose bucket, we'll have a simple pose bucket, and we'll typically have a jumps bucket. And when we get into the studio, we'll look over those buckets with the dancers and have them choose what they're comfortable with within those buckets. That way they have a little bit of input into the photo shoot and they also get to pick what's going to look best on them. If you've watched our previous video on one light setups for dance photography, we're actually doing a similar setup today. It's a variation on that. We have two large 4-foot octaboxes set up on camera left here, acting as one main light. And then we also have just one additional light on top, acting as a hair light, a little rim light. And we've added 2 fill cards on camera right over here to give a little bit of fill for that full-length portrait. So when we start with every photo shoot, even if we know the dancer really well, we like to start with some simpler poses. That way they get a little bit more comfortable in front of the camera, and then we can move on from there into slightly more challenging poses. Typically a simpler pose for dance photography photo shoots tend to be on 2 feet, tend to be maybe moving the upper body a little bit more than anything else. And that way they just get their body moving a little bit. We start seeing how they react in front of the camera. And then that way we can figure out what might look good on them and move on from that basic structure. The simple pose that we've decided to start with today is a tendu back croisé, or crossed in French. When you do a pose in a cross position, you have to trick the camera into representing what our mind sees in 3 dimensions onto a 2-dimensional plane. As a result, the dancer will want to do a tendu on a diagonal, but you really want to think of making them a little bit flat, like they're stuck between 2 panes of glass. That way that back leg really shows the length and it represents the tendu that they would like to see on the 2-dimensional plane. So from our simple pose, we asked her if she would like to maybe move on to some extensions. And so we chose from that extensions bucket an extension that goes to the side. It's pretty simple. It's just flat on to the camera with arms in a nice simple 5th position. And what we're gonna do after we've done that pose a few times is we're gonna move it into a slightly more challenging version of that. So we're building off of that and doing a nice progression. All right, so we got that tilted version of the simple pose, and now we're gonna just change the arms, so we're actually getting 3 different images out of the same pose. So a few other things when we're doing these types of poses, or in general about the focus of the dancer. Dancers sometimes tend to look down because they're concentrating on things. So what we like to do, especially when they like to look down, is tell them to look at something specific in the space. So it's okay for them to have a low focus, but sometimes when they do that, we lose the whites of their eyes and it looks like their face is really shut down. So what we like to do is just lift that gaze, even if it's low and far away. It can still be low, but the far away actually lets us see their eyes a little bit better, and the image comes alive a little bit more. Another really cool thing that we like to do in the studio is creating like saved albums and collections within Instagram to sort of create a catalog for each of our buckets. As we're scrolling through and we like a pose that we see on Instagram, we'll just save it to the appropriate bucket and then we're able to pull that up during our shoot and the dancer is able to look through those and get some inspirations, and we use that as a basis to then build on that foundation. Now we're gonna move on to our floor pose bucket. So we're gonna look through the images that are in that bucket and see what she might like to choose from. So now we're going to move on to the jumping bucket, and the reason I'm coming back into our storage area is because we're going to use an acro mat that acts as a little trampoline for the dancers to be able to do the really difficult jumps and not get too tired and get into the position a little bit easier. We prefer this over trampolines because it's a little bit softer, it's a little bit wider surface area, so typically if you have the small trampoline, they have to do things really contained and be very careful about where they're jumping and where they're landing, and this gives us a little bit more flexibility. It's also easier to edit out because it's lower profile than a trampoline. It doesn't create shadows, so we're able to really edit this out quite easily in post, and we get a really nice, beautiful jump. All right, so now we're moving on to our jumps bucket, and I actually got some inspiration from the last pose that she did on the floor, which she's in like an attitude back, and so we decided to do a similar pose but as a jump. So she's gonna use the bouncy thing. That's not what we're gonna call it.
Yeah,
okay. So she's gonna use the acromat to get into this pose, maybe warm up a little bit as she's doing it. That way she's easing into it and we're not putting a lot of strain on her body. This pose in ballet terms is technically called a seesaw and attitude back, but dancers like to call it different things. Mostly it's referred to as a firebird. One of the main things to keep in mind in general for dance photography, but especially when you're jumping, is be careful that the jump doesn't deviate from being parallel to your camera's sensor. So if the leg goes away from the camera, it starts looking short, and if the leg comes towards the camera, it starts looking longer and bigger, and that distortion can really affect the way that the image looks. So you have to be careful in trying to make sure that you don't get too much of a diagonal and start keeping things a little bit flatter, whether it's at a cross position or in a straight flat position as well. All right, so we actually have a bonus bucket for you. We're gonna show you how we use props, and today we're gonna use these posing boxes, but we're gonna show you how we incorporate that into our posing for dance photography. It's a really helpful way to get a little bit more creativity out of the dancer, especially maybe towards the end of a shoot once we've captured all the action shots, and we get some really great creative things with these boxes. So that's a wrap on today's demonstration. I'd like to thank Carolina for being such a wonderful model to work with. If you took anything of value from our video, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you want to drop us a comment to let us know what you'd like to see next from us, that would be great. We're considering doing a more in-depth version of this posing video, so to talk about technique, specific terminology, and different tips and tricks that we could offer to you guys. Let us know if you'd be interested in that, and that way we can put that on the list of to-dos. As always, thank you so much for tuning in, and take care.